Have you ever wondered if a look could kill? Literally? Across cultures, across centuries, whispers have survived about being so powerful, so cursed, that a single glance could turn flesh into stone. They didn't need weapons. They didn't speak spells. They just looked, and death followed. This is the myth of the gaze, and two names stand above all others: Basilisk and Medusa. One, born of venom and darkness, slithered through medieval bestiaries as the king of serpents, a creature so toxic it could wilt grass with its breath. The other, a cursed beauty with serpents for hair, condemned to live in exile, where her stare became a weapon and her face a mirror of horror. But maybe these weren't just monsters. Maybe they were something more. What if the gaze wasn't only about death, but about truth? What if these myths were warnings, not of creatures outside us, but forces within us, forces we're too afraid to confront? In today's journey, we're going deeper than folklore. We'll explore the hidden symbols behind their eyes, the ancient fear of being seen too clearly, and the powerful idea that what truly petrifies us isn't a monster's look, but what it reveals. Because in the end, the deadliest gaze may not come from some ancient beast. It might come from a reflection, from the moment you finally see yourself. Let's begin. It was called the Little King, not because of its size, but because of the sheer power it held. The basilisk wasn't a beast you fought. It was a force you avoided. According to medieval lore, you didn't hear it coming, you didn't smell it, you didn't even need to touch it. All it took was a glance. One look, and you were dead. The basilisk legend stretches far back, finding its roots in the dusty pages of Roman natural history. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century, claimed this creature could scorch the earth with its breath and crack stones with its stare. Later stories claimed even its shadow could kill. It wasn't just feared, it was unnatural. But what's most disturbing is how it was said to be born. Not from a mother's womb, but from a rooster's egg, laid under rare astrological conditions, then incubated by a snake or a toad. A reversal of nature, a mockery of life. To the minds of the Middle Ages, this wasn't just bizarre, it was heresy. Something so twisted it could only be explained by sin or sorcery. To alchemists and mystics, the basilisk symbolized more than death. It represented the first stage of spiritual transformation, a confrontation with darkness. In alchemical texts, this phase was called nigredo, the blackening, the place where ego dies, the place where truth becomes unbearable. That's why the basilisk didn't simply kill, it revealed. Its gaze was the embodiment of judgment, a mirror reflecting your deepest corruption. You didn't die because it hated you. You died because you couldn't face what you saw in its eyes. Even in Christian symbolism, the basilisk took on a deeper role. It became an avatar of the devil, a creature that didn't tempt you. It simply exposed you. No fiery battle, no dramatic showdown, just a glance that said, "This is who you really are." And that's why so many ancient stories describe only one way to kill it, by using a mirror. Knights were told to carry polished shields, not to look directly, but to reflect. Because to defeat the basilisk wasn't just about courage, it was about seeing without being seen. It was about turning the monster's power back on itself. So what does this mean today? Maybe the basilisk never slithered through castles or poisoned wells. Maybe it never needed to. Maybe it lives in the places we avoid looking, in guilt, in shame, in truths we bury. Because sometimes the deadliest thing isn't the monster outside you. It's the one staring back at you when you dare to look within. If the basilisk was born of venom and darkness, Medusa was born of pain. Her story isn't just about monsters, it's about betrayal, about transformation, about how society turns victims into threats and then calls them evil, before the serpents, before the stone. Medusa was human. Some say she was a priestess of Athena, others say she was simply beautiful, so beautiful that even gods took notice. And then, as one version goes, she was violated by Poseidon, inside Athena's temple, a sacred place, desecrated. But instead of punishing the god, Athena cursed Medusa. Her hair became snakes, her face unbearable to look at, her gaze fatal. Just like that, a victim became a weapon, a woman turned into a warning. But maybe there's more to it. Medusa's gaze didn't kill out of anger or cruelty. It wasn't random. It was defensive. Anyone who looked at her with desire or aggression, anyone who dared objectify her was turned to stone. In that sense, Medusa wasn't a monster. She was a mirror, one that reflected your true intent. To the Greeks, she was terrifying. To the Romans, she became a symbol of protection, her head carved into armor and shields to ward off evil. Even now, her face appears in fashion, art, and sculpture. But her symbolism is deeper than decoration. In myth, the only person who could defeat Medusa was Perseus, but he couldn't face her directly. He used a mirror, a polished shield, to avoid eye contact. He struck from reflection, not because she was too powerful, but because he couldn't face her honestly. What does that say about us? We fear Medusa not because she is monstrous, but because she forces us to look inward. She challenges our gaze. She reverses the power. And in doing so, she exposes something society often tries to suppress: the rage of the wronged, the power of the feminine, the truth behind the beautiful. In modern psychology, Medusa is often seen as an archetype, the embodiment of repressed emotion, especially anger. She reminds us that trauma, when ignored, doesn't disappear, it transforms. And when that pain isn't heard, when it isn't healed, it looks back. And we call it dangerous. But maybe Medusa was never meant to be feared. Maybe she was meant to be understood. Not a monster in the shadows, but a guide, a warning, a voice saying, if you keep ignoring the broken parts of yourself, one day they will look back, and when they do, you won't be able to turn away. Why do we fear the gaze? Not just being watched, but being seen, truly, deeply, without masks. It's one of the oldest fears in human history. And in mythology, this fear has a face. Sometimes it hisses, sometimes it weeps, but it always stares. The basilisk and Medusa are two sides of the same ancient symbol, the deadly gaze. One turns you to stone through sheer poison, the other through pain. But in both cases, death doesn't come from violence, it comes from vision. In psychology, this isn't just fantasy. It speaks to something primal. To look someone in the eyes is to be vulnerable. It's to risk being judged, misunderstood, or worse. Truly, eye contact is a challenge, a confrontation, a mirror. In ancient cultures, the eyes were thought to hold power. In Egypt, the Eye of Horus represented protection, healing, and divine insight. In the evil eye traditions across the Mediterranean, a look could bring curses, illness, even death. And in modern life, we still say things like, if looks could kill. But what makes the gaze so dangerous in myth isn't just that it harms, it's that it reveals. The basilisk shows the rot beneath the surface, the corruption we try to hide. Medusa reflects our guilt, our complicity, our discomfort with power we can't control. These creatures weren't feared because they attacked. They were feared because they exposed something we couldn't bear to see. And isn't that what myths are for? They aren't just stories to entertain. They're codes, symbols, mirrors passed down through time, asking the same questions over and over again. What are you afraid to look at? What truth would petrify you? What part of yourself would you rather keep in the dark? In this light, the basilisk and Medusa stop being monsters. They become archetypes, timeless patterns in the human mind. They show up in different clothes, different shapes, across every culture. But the message stays the same. Beware the truth you aren't ready to face. Because in the end, the deadliest gaze isn't theirs, it's ours. It's the gaze we avoid in the mirror, the inner reflection we bury under noise, routine, distraction. And yet, like myth, it waits, patient, eternal. So maybe these creatures don't come to kill us. Maybe they come to wake us, to say, you can't hide forever, to ask, can you stand to see what you've become? Because the moment you do, everything changes. We began with death by sight, a serpent's gaze that kills with poison. A cursed woman whose eyes turn flesh to stone. But now, as we step back, it's clear these were never just monsters. They were messages. The Basilisk and Medusa aren't about fear, they're about revelation. They ask, what happens when you're seen without your defenses? What happens when the masks fall, the ego cracks, and the truth stares back? That's why their stories endure, because we recognize something in them, not as creatures out there, but as forces inside us. The part of us that's toxic when ignored, the pain that becomes rage when silenced, the truth that becomes unbearable when buried too long. The deadly gaze in the end isn't about physical death. It's about ego death. It's the end of denial, the breaking of illusion. And that's where freedom begins. In mythology, both creatures are slain with mirrors, shields polished to reflect, not confront. Because sometimes the only way to defeat the monster is not to fight it, but to see it clearly. To see yourself clearly. Maybe that's the real danger. Not the myth, not the snake or the stare, but the moment you stop running, the moment you stop blaming the world or fate or curses and look into your own eyes and see everything you've been avoiding. But here's the twist. When you finally look, you don't turn to stone. You wake up. Because the monsters we fear the most, the ones we bury in stories, in shadows, in ancient symbols, they're often just parts of ourselves asking to be acknowledged, to be healed, to be freed. So the next time you hear about a creature that kills with its eyes, don't just think of danger. Think of truth. Think of transformation. Think of the power that comes when you finally stop hiding. Because in the end, Medusa and the Basilisk weren't warnings about looking too closely. They were invitations to stop turning away, to face the mirror. And to remember that the scariest truths are also the ones that set you free.